Welcome to today's episode of The Swish Show. I'm super excited because he's flown all the way up from Sydney to join me for a live, unscripted podcast here on the beautiful Gold Coast. Today's guest is no other than the main man himself, Mr. Jack Delosa. Jack Delosa, quite simply, builds businesses. He is the founder and CEO of Australia's largest business coaching provider, the Entourage, with a global community of nearly 1 million business owners. Under his leadership, the Entourage has been awarded the 4th best place to work in Australia and the top 50 in Australasia by Best Places to Work. Prior to the Entourage, Jack co-founded MBE Group, which helped small to medium-sized businesses raise money from investors. MBA enabled their clients to raise over 300 million from investors and will go on to become one of Australia's fastest growing companies. During this episode, we dig deep into questions that he's never been asked before on business and scaling, mindset and identity, and how he's now navigating his relationship and fatherhood while still growing at pace. Enjoy. All right, Mr. Jack Delosa, welcome to the Swish Show.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome to the Gold Coast. This is actually real.
This is the best picture of the Gold Coast skyline I've ever seen in my life.
Just for those people that think that's fake, that's actually.
And yeah, that's not green screen. That's a real skyline.
It is.
And thanks for traveling so far, mate. I know you live a long way from here.
It's just there.
Yeah.
When are you moving to the Gold Coast? Have you ever thought about moving here?
I have thought about it because Panda's from here.
Yes.
So we've thought about it. If we move, we're currently based in Sydney. If we move anywhere, it'll be to the States.
Yeah.
If we moved anywhere else in Australia, it'd be Goldie. But I don't think that'll happen for a little while.
Well, I got a list of questions. The more I look into your journey, the more I realize we need a full day to obviously discuss and dissect everything. But there's a few crossovers with your life, my life. But you just seem to have done it 20 years before I did.
Sure.
And I find that aspect quite interesting in general. About
so you're saying I'm old?
You're actually not. That's the worst thing. I'm old. That's the worst thing. I'm playing catch up. But what I really want to know is, like, you've created monumental businesses. You've helped so many businesses globally, I believe now. You stood on our stage 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's fine.
I think it was almost 2 years ago, August 23.
Right.
We had a chat over lunch, and I remember talking to you about you stepping back into the Entourage.
Yep.
You were going to take the reins again.
Yep.
I first want to know, what's the last 18 months, 2 years been like for you being back on the front line with the Entourage?
It's probably been the best couple of years of my life, to be honest. And I wasn't expecting it to be. I mean, a large part of that, which I was expecting to be really enjoyable, was, Panda and I got married last year. Our daughter is now 2. And so I think when you have a personal life and a home life and a family life that's really invigorating and fuels you, and anyone with a kid 2 or under knows that it comes with its inevitable challenges. Yes. But when you're fueled and juiced and fulfilled, it really flows into every aspect of your life, particularly as a founder, your business. What happened with me, it's interesting that I spoke to your audience in August of 23, because I stepped back in as CEO of the Entourage in September of 23. So it would have been a month away when I came and visited you guys. And it's been an interesting exercise in building a business that you love to own and building a business that you want to run. And so I had a CEO in place for 3 years who was a great operator, but I had really kind of delegated a lot of the operational execution and also some of the strategic decisions. And so, and I don't just mean, had a team that I delegated to, I mean like full operational and a lot of strategic delegation. And so come September of 23, I had accrued what I now term alignment debt. And essentially what that meant was I was coming back into a business that I didn't necessarily want to run. I was coming back into a business that didn't feel aligned to who I was, and also didn't necessarily feel like it was set up in the most intelligent way for future growth and future scale. And so it was a challenging puzzle to come in and fix, similar to being the father of a daughter who's under 2 and now 2.
Yeah.
loved it, but challenging. The CEO journey was similar.
That puzzle keeps growing. The baby one.
Yeah, but yeah, both.
Both.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so my whole thing is, I think that business should fuel your life and life should fuel your business. I don't believe in work-life balance. I believe in work-life integration. And so work-life balance positions kind of work as the enemy and suggests that each aspect of your life is kind of competing against one another. My philosophy towards life and business is, how do we set everything up so that every aspect of life doesn't compete but complements each other? And so since coming back in as CEO, we've grown faster and easier than we ever have. You know, from a profitability perspective, we're probably 10x'd. From an efficiency perspective and a headcount perspective, I've got a team of incredible A players, and we've probably brought headcount and costs down by about 30% from when I came in 2 years ago. And so costs have come down, but performances, you know, I'd say 8 to 10x'd. And to be honest, that's not even the stuff that fuels my fire. What more fuels my fire is that today we're a business that absolutely delivers exceptionally to our members and our clients. It's a place that our team loves coming to work. You know, we were listed as the 4th best place to work in Australia. I think if we went through that exercise again today, we'd probably be in a similar position. And it's a business that I love running. You know, every day I wake up excited to do whatever it is that I'm doing. I did an exercise recently, and it was a page with essentially 2 numbers on it. What's your current monthly revenue? And then if you were to 10x your current monthly revenue, what would it be? And it's important to realize that if you don't love your business at its current revenue, you're going to hate it at 10x the revenue.
Because you've 10x the problems as well, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Scale doesn't solve problems. Scale uncovers problems. And so you don't want to have a bunch of problems and then grow them. You want to get your business sound and then scale it intelligently. And then the other thing on the page was, if you draw a line down the middle of the page, on the left I had drainers, and on the right I had gainers. What drains my energy? What gains my energy? What gives me energy? I had no drainers. And so I'm not doing anything today. And that's amazing. Like your face, right? I didn't expect me to have no drainers until I actually did this exercise, which a coach of mine prompted me to do.
September 23, then, when you go back in.
September 23.
What were the drainers?
The columns would have been the opposite.
People.
It would have been all drainers and very little gainers. And there's a lesson in that as well, which is probably why you asked the question, which is, the people watching this podcast right now, it might be half drainers, half gainers, or maybe you're like me in September of 2023, where it's like all drainers, no gainers. It's like you have the control. You have the ability. I'd go as far to say you have the obligation to design your business and design your life exactly how you want it. And that is not in opposition to profitability, performance, or scale. This interesting thing happens when you build a business that you love to own and love to run, is that performance, 10x's and easier than it was when you were living every day doing all your drainers. And so, it's just yet another example of me that hopefully other business owners and founders can take some light from, which is, it doesn't matter how bad things get. Back in 2016, we went through a challenging period because we went into accredited education and the industry changed. And then 2023 was definitely it wasn't anywhere near as challenging as 2016, but it's a similar circumstance in terms of things needed to change. You have the ability to create your business and your life any way you want.
Can I ask on that? Because 2016 flipped your business upside down and you were right on the edge, and you've spoke about this several times.
Yeah. I was over the edge.
Yeah, you were dangling. Yeah. You were doing the Q1 hang. You do come across. I've met you a couple of times now, a few times. I met you probably before definitely before you knew who I was, when I came to an unconvention back in the day.
Yep.
You seem so calm and controlled all the time, and I've watched the way you interact away from the cameras, away from the stage. That sounds creepy, doesn't it?
I get what you mean, though. I do.
and you do seem very calm and controlled. Like, is there ever a time you feel totally out of depth? And if so, how do you deal with that? Was 2016 one of those stages?
To the most extreme degree I've ever felt. I was so out of my depth. I was so in over my head. I felt like I was drowning every day. You know, I remember one conversation, I was having a board meeting. That's the other thing, is I don't have a board anymore. I don't believe in boards for small businesses. It's a waste of time, and it takes you off your own alignment, particularly when you get to a place where you have your own degree of capability and you know you don't need a board. So, but we're having a board meeting back then, and I was talking about how I was going to get us out of trouble. And a board member said to me, you know, does this excite you? And I looked at him and said, that's a silly question right now. You know, we are $5 million in the hole. We are losing about $500,000 a month. We're 3 months away from losing $800,000 a month. I've got to go out and, you know, trigger 50 redundancies to go from a team of 90 to a team of 40. And so, no, nothing about this path excites me, but it's what is required for the business to survive and to get a chance to scale in a way that's healthy again. And so, yeah, I definitely was in over my head. Interestingly, what you just said, one of my business partners in a different business that I was in at the time and helping run at the time, said to me in hindsight, I think you might have seen some of the content I produced around it a few years later, and he was like, you didn't seem stressed. And that was surprising to me, because I was more stressed than I've ever been.
Yeah.
And so to come back to your question in terms of how do I deal with that, is there's really two things that are fundamentally very simple, but work for me. The first thing is acceptance. And what I mean by that is, I think we live in a culture today where there's this extreme misconception that we should be happy all the time. We should be fulfilled all the time. We should be winning all the time. We should be succeeding all the time. We should feel blissful all the time. And it's a fundamental misunderstanding of reality and the human condition and life, right? And so, you know, if you take your average day, by definition, mathematically, half your days are going to be above your average day and half your days are going to be below your average day.
Yeah.
And if you're a founder or a business owner or a high-level executive or anybody pursuing a dream, you're inviting an extreme degree of challenge into your life. And so when I'm going through a challenging period, I just accept that that's part of the journey, particularly as an entrepreneur. And I take responsibility for getting there, and I take responsibility for getting out of there. And in 2016, I literally just said to myself, Jack, you're not going to enjoy the next couple of years.
It's a conversation with self, though, right? Nobody external is doing that for you.
Yes. Because here's the thing, man. I've never found anybody that kind of says that. I think that too often, if you were to speak to a therapist or speak to a coach, you know, I think too often that everybody's trying to put too much of a positive lens on it. And I don't think, for me in 2016, that wasn't what I needed. I didn't need positive lens. I needed a heavy dose of reality. And so it was purely, Jack, you're not going to enjoy the next couple of years. Do you want to do this or do you want to quit? And for me and for you and probably for the vast majority of people watching this, quitting's not an option. And so there's your answer. So the first thing is acceptance. The second thing is just take it a day at a time. And this is something that I no longer suffer from, but I observed in myself, I definitely suffered from in 2016, 17, was I wanted to solve all the problems today. And so part of my maturing through, you know, probably the 3 years, 16, 17, 18, was I had to become comfortable, you know, getting to 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the afternoon and going, I haven't solved the world's problems. I haven't secured our future indefinitely forever. But I probably should go home and have dinner and go to bed.
But I've moved the needle.
I've moved the needle.
Yeah.
As best as I could today.
Yes.
And so the two things for me for navigating challenging times, and, you know, the other thing to this is, you know, we've kind of honed in on the two most challenging periods of my career over the last 20 years, 2023 and 2016. It's really, I hope part of what people can take from that is the majority of your time in business will be spent navigating challenge. And so that's part of the acceptance piece.
And if so, your mum was a teacher, right? She was a teacher at TAFE.
Yeah.
And I did read that you'd done a lot of emotional intelligence training, CBT training, like when you were a kid, right? When you were
a kid, like 6.
So and it's quite interesting because my boys yesterday did a colour run at the school, just around the corner from here.
Yeah.
And Fox, well, they're both introverts by nature. They've inherited all of those introvert tendencies that I had, and I'm trying to unprint from them. And I thought Fox would freeze yesterday at the running race, and I saw him lining up, and we'd spoken over the prior few days about this race and said, how are you going to feel when you see everybody watching you? And he goes, I'll just keep running. And I'm thinking, he's not going to keep running. He's not. He's going to freeze. He's going to stop. And I said, well, what are you going to think about? And he says, well, we have to jump over things. I said, okay, so I want you to look at the obstacles that you got to jump over. And I says, what are you going to do with your hands? And he says, I'm ready to run. So he had his hands like this, like he was doing karate.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, so I want you to think about your hands. I want you to push your fingers out. And we had a really in-depth conversation about this. And in my head, I'm trying to teach him to regulate so he can focus and just doesn't freeze.
Yeah.
He finished 3rd out of 80 kids. And he's a little fella, 4-year-old.
Wow.
And he flew around. And I'm like, I cried. Yes. I was like, what's going on here? But the reason I share that story is like the training from such a young age, hopefully, is going to help him in future years. How impactful was that with your mum in the early years, or just being exposed to all of that?
It's probably the most fundamental and formative component of my upbringing. And so mum was a TAFE teacher, but then mum and dad ran a not-for-profit organisation called Breaking the Cycle, and so they'd take youth at risk off the street and out of jail and out of abusive homes. They'd put them through a personal development and employability training program and take them out into the wilderness and do all of these different kind of life skill development pieces with them. And then they'd facilitate them into employment. They were extremely good at what they did. Mum was the head teacher, dad was the managing director. And then in our house, I grew up in a house where what was around me all the time was books on neuro-linguistic programming, books on psychology, management, leadership. I remember listening to the 1 Minute Manager, Ken Blanchard, cassettes. So
Hassie, you are old.
Yeah, correct. I don't know how old I must have been, but I was extremely young and listening to cassettes in my room and taking notes.
Yeah.
And so, the psychology piece is like 80 to 90% of the game, because you meet people all the time that might have a high degree of intellect, but they don't necessarily have the instinct, and they don't necessarily have the psychology of a champion. And that means that they are less effectual in business and in life than somebody that has less intellect, but is able to communicate with themselves and others more effectively.
But it can be taught. All right, that's why you guys exist.
100%.
Yeah.
What about? In fact, I think it can only be learned. I don't think anybody's born with it.
Yeah. It's
people
but the
might
early
be born with a
better,
high degree of empathy or something like that. But if you want to be highly skilled in anything, even if you are born with a natural degree of talent, talent's not enough. If you want to have a high degree of capability in anything, it has to be trained. It has to be developed.
And what about then, whether consciously, unconsciously, through osmosis of being around it, what did you learn back in the day, or even through business, that now you've gone, all right, that doesn't work anymore? Like a first aid qualification changes every year. Like that worked last year, but it doesn't work this year in business. What have you had to unlearn, or what did you previously teach that you now go, guys, don't do that anymore?
That's such a good question. I don't know if there's anything that I've necessarily taught, but as in taught, but later kind of learnt the opposite. But a huge piece for me was also, and this is a good kind of extra dimension to what we were just discussing, is I came up in psychology and all that kind of stuff, and then I started to do a bunch of personal development courses and NLP courses. And the courses were framed as, learn these skills and then you'll be able to build a successful business and you'll be able to have great relationships and you'll succeed in every area of your life. And what I found through observation is I would go through these courses with cohorts, and then you'd stay in touch with the cohorts in the years to come. And what I found was a year would pass and 2 years had passed and 3 years had passed, and no one was making any more money than what they had previously. If anything, they were making less money. And so one of the key lessons for me through that journey, and particularly over the last 20 years, has been psychology is the foundation. But if you want to be successful in business, in and of itself, it's incomplete. There is a skill set to being an entrepreneur. You better know how to sell. And nobody's born with that skill, as you know better than anybody. It's trained and it's learned, and it's trained, as in repetition. You better develop a capability in terms of how to take your ideas and your value proposition to market and understand marketing. You will get to a point where your business is growing to such a degree, but you haven't scaled your delivery. And so you've kind of got this growing base of unhappy customers. And so you have to learn how to deliver at a high quality, at scale, and eventually do all of that without your operational involvement. You will get to a certain level, I'm talking to the audience here, obviously, one will get to a certain level where you have to learn the fundamentals of money. And I don't mean, I want you in spreadsheets doing your bank reconciliations or anything like that, but you need to understand your P&L. And in the beginning you won't, and that's okay. And that'll take you to $1 million, it might take you to 5, but you will get to a point where you need to become more astute in terms of having strong financial visibility, knowing how to interpret it, and therefore making financially informed decisions, whereas previously you were just able to kind of wing it because the business was still in startup phase. And so there are business skills that must be learned. And I would go as far to say, if you've got a growing business, they will be learned. It's just whether you want to pay in, I'm going to come and do a 3-day course with Ryan and pay a minimal amount of money relative to what I'm going to get out of it. Sure. Or whether I want to learn those skills through 5 or 10 years of painful trial and error, or trying to, scrape around YouTube to find, the answers or whatever. And so you will learn the lessons of business. It's just about, you need to ask yourself, do you want to learn them quickly through a Tucky or an Entourage or whoever? Or do you want to learn them painfully and over decades and slowly?
Well, I naturally have a bias towards sales, of course.
Yes.
And I always say, we only survived the early years of business because we knew how to sell. We did not know how to run a business. So my default, and maybe ignorantly, is to say that the fundamental skill to learn is sales. We do a component about psychology. So that would be my question. If you're going to pick up a business right now and I'm the founder, I say to you, I just don't have the time. I don't have the funds, the resources to employ people to scale this business. How can I move the needle quickly? What is, if you look into a business, what is the first thing you're working on? Is it marketing? Is it sales? Is it processes, system? What are you doing with them?
Well, the first thing you need is a strong offer. And so what's the product or service? And you want that to be a marriage between what you're really great at and what you enjoy producing or delivering, and market need. And so it's not just as simple as follow your passion. You need an addressable market. And so, if someone was to be starting a restaurant, they would be pitching me to invest in the restaurant. The question is, what is the number one thing you would want to communicate to me to give me confidence of the future success of the restaurant? Is it a great head chef? Is it ambiance? Is it team? What is the number one indicator? I would argue the number one indicator is, have you found a hungry crowd? Because if you found a hungry crowd, it doesn't matter if your food isn't great to begin with. You can perfect it over time. If there's a hungry crowd, people will want to eat. And so...
Is that a term because you said restaurant, or is that actually a mindset of I'm looking for a hungry crowd? Because I could find a hungry crowd of entrepreneurs looking for business skills, right?
Yes.
So is that actually a phrase that
That's the term that I use.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. You have to find your hungry crowd, and it should be a marriage between what you believe you can deliver in the early days, particularly if you need something that's lean and not capital intensive, and who's your hungry crowd. And if you can marry those two things together, then it's time to sell.
Yeah, nice. You mentioned investing in there, and you've invested in a range of different things over the years.
A huge range,
like things. Aviation, I read in there as well. Yeah. There's loads of stuff.
The aviation was a jetpack company,
as in
jetpacks.
The fly from the side. That's cool. That's cool. That's going to be a good reel. Jack's going out the window.
I didn't personally have a jetpack, but it was a great business, and I mean that was back in like 2014, and it was a successful investment. Yeah.
So what excites you now? Are you into AI? Are you in that rabbit hole? I've seen you run some events around it.
What excites me now in terms of investment?
Investing, yeah. What do you think is a good opportunity for people considering investing?
I think what excites me now in terms of investment, to be honest, AI, because AI is just the market, right? Like, or the industry, and it's going to be a huge rising tide. But it's not the first thing that I look at. I know a lot of people playing around with AI right now, and the product is pretty much ChatGPT. They don't have a hungry crowd, and no one's buying their thing. Like I know people right now that are in that game.
Yeah.
And so AI, it's exciting.
But it's shiny, right? It sounds good.
And that's why the distinction that I'm making, I think, is a really important one, because what I care about is the founder capable? Do they have good instincts? Do they have a growth mindset? Are they coachable? And do I think this person can scale a business to $50, $100 million? Secondly, do they have a hungry crowd? Even if the product isn't fully dialed in, even if the message to market isn't fully dialed in, because I can probably help with that, but do they have a hungry crowd? And then thirdly, if it's an AI first business, then those three things lining up together would make it a attractive investment proposition.
Yeah, nice. And we have a bit of an overlap on an event that we both went to, a retreat. I don't know if you can call it a retreat. We went to Necker Island at different times. Thank you for you were my nominator by accident. I think through Fiona. But that experience, and I say this with so much intent, changed my life.
Yes.
5 days changed my life. And I want to know if it did for you, and if so, how. One of my big takeaways on the island was there were 40 entrepreneurs from all around the world. 22 of them were post-exit, and a lot of them, they have hundreds of millions, if not one guy had 1.1 billion that he exited for US.
Yeah.
Was not happy, was not fulfilled, and they hadn't found the day-to-day gainers. It seemed like they spent a lifetime drained, but got the exit and then weren't there. So my big takeaway was I'm very lucky, firstly, that I really enjoy the day-to-day of what I do. And my second takeaway was how well Fiona and Forming Impact curated that community. Nobody asked about revenue. Nobody asked about company size. It was an assumed level of success if you were there, which meant the conversations got so much deeper. So I felt a connection with people like I never felt before. It was almost like a Big Brother TV show experience, where if you watch Big Brother, people leave after 3 days and other people cry because they're like, oh my God, I can't believe they're leaving. I'm like, you've just met them. Necker Island was like that for me. And I couldn't put a finger on it until I realized that it was heavily curated and to get on the island. And I've really taken those principles of how we've created our legacy program. And I know you're very careful on who you allow, for want of a better phrase, into your membership.
Definitely.
So 2 questions is, number 1, what did Necker Island do for you? And then 2, how do you pick your members of the Entourage?
Yeah, both really good questions. So my takeaway from NECA was the same takeaway as you, which is the connection that I felt and experienced was really profound. For me, it was kind of in reverse sequence in that through the Entourage, so the first time I went to NECA was 2014, and then I was there in, I think, 2022. And so if I speak about 2022, because that's probably the one that's more front of mind for me, at that point, I started the Entourage in 2010. And so I'd had 12 years of history and experience of people saying to me, this community is incredible. And I felt like an outsider, and I felt like I was fucked up, and I felt like there was something wrong with me, and I felt like the insecurities that I have, I was the only one. And then I came into this environment and ecosystem, and they usually say, I didn't learn that I'm not crazy, I just learned that there's a whole lot of other crazy people just like me. And there's something that's really cathartic and therapeutic about just that alone. Before you even have a deep and meaningful conversation, before you even resolve any of the challenges that you might be carrying, just the realization that, the problems that I'm experiencing in business, everybody experiences. The insecurities that I feel are literally universal. Every person here, in the room of 8 or the room of 800 is experiencing the same internal insecurities. And so just that realization alone is incredibly freeing and empowering. And so in a weird kind of a way, some of it's by design and some of it, I suppose, was just kind of good fortune. We had been creating that experience for others for so long. But as you know, as the person leading and curating the retreats or the conferences or whatever, you probably tap into that slightly less because you're there to, you've got a job to do. And so for NECA, for me, it was, this is how my members feel. This is how my clients feel. And so it was cool to be on the other side of the experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Your second question around what do we look for in members? We look, the first thing is, are you coachable? Because if somebody isn't, they're not going to be successful in business. I think great entrepreneurs have this dichotomy. They're incredibly independently minded and incredibly centered and certain in themselves and their direction, but almost kind of in a juxtaposition and a contradiction. They're also extremely hungry to learn and want to be coached, provided the person or people they're listening to have been there, done that experience, and they can respect the opinion. And so that's what we look for.
What am I saying that suggests I'm either coachable or not coachable? Is there anything in particular where you go, oh no, we thought we had you?
You will. So everybody that comes into our program comes through an application process. So the first one is a 30-minute chat to determine high-level fit and feel. And the second is kind of like a 90-minute to 2-hour what we call exploration session, which is where we go, where is the business now? What do we think is possible for this brand to achieve over 3 years, 12 months, and 90 days? And then the third piece is, what's the tailored roadmap for this person and this business, given their constraints, their psychology, their cash at bank, their financial position, taking into consideration everything that's unique about this person and business? What's the tailored roadmap to get them from where they are to where they could potentially be?
Yeah.
Throughout that process, you will know.
Yeah, you're spending a lot of time.
You're spending a lot of time with them. And so it's like, I've got, what will happen if someone's not coachable is I have all of these problems and I don't want to do anything differently.
Yeah.
So, okay, great. Good to meet you and good luck.
Yeah.
Come see us when you are ready to make some changes.
Do you get people that get angry with you if you reject them? We're getting that. I think we do it elegantly, but we only accept 22% of applicants thus far into our legacy program.
Yep.
People get annoyed. It's like, because we as I say, we're taking on the principle of what we did on Necker and how well it was curated. So I want to be really strict with it.
Yep.
But then we get people that are annoyed with us, and then my people-pleasing side.
Yep.
And I've fought it. We still haven't let them in, but my people-pleasing side then gets triggered because I have this desire to be liked all the time.
Yep.
Which, again, I said earlier on, you seem very calm, but you also seem that you're quite a likable character to your team and everybody else that you meet. Do you fight that at all? The desire to be liked, and even with the social media posts, you're getting a bit more controversial in your old age, aren't you? Let's talk about Trump, shall we? Is it intentional, or is somebody asking just some really rogue question? I'll blame Panda.
Let's do that. Let's
do
just
that,
blame
yeah.
Panda. First time in any podcast ever, somebody has referred to the current stage of life as in your old age.
In your old age.
I love it.
What's been 10 years younger than me?
In your old age. Okay, so there's a lot there. Let's start with the being liked thing. I think what's happened with me is I've been through some extremely high highs. You know, I built businesses with valuations of $50 million. I've had 2 exits over the last 10 years. I've essentially retired twice. Got restless both times. You know, I think when somebody succeeds, there's 2 options. They can kind of retire and enjoy the life that they've built, or they can reverse engineer their roadmap and hand the roadmap back to others so that others can build the life that they want to build and achieve a level of success that they want to build. And so that's why the Entourage exists, is it's just about handing back the roadmap. And so I've experienced an extremely high degree of success. I've also experienced many years of excruciating difficulty and challenge. You know, probably to an extent that would break most people, or at least cause them to quit. And so there's that, and what both of those things will do is they will knock the ego out of you. And that's what they did for me. Then I overlay that with becoming a father a couple of years ago. And that was kind of like the final straw of giving a fuck about what other people think. And so my desire to be liked today is extremely low. And then what I've found is, since the more that has become true for me over the years, in a funny kind of a way, the more people tend to like and respect you. Now, equally, the more people will get triggered by you and not like you. But if you don't care, then then you don't even hear it. And so I think one of the biggest limiters on people building a personal brand is they haven't fostered the courage to be disliked. And when you can foster the courage to be disliked, you will start to resonate with your people 10x, you know, to the extent that you did before.
The hungry crowd, right?
Exactly.
They start to
and you want to be a little bit polarizing, because you want to be clear who you are and who you are not for. To come back to the first aspect of that question, which was, what about when people get kind of upset about not being allowed in? What we do is we give them very specific milestones and very specific things to work on and develop that will allow them to reapply. And so what we would need to see is A, B, and C, and we would need to see the business get to here, and we suggest that you do some work around whatever it might be. And so if we can give them a roadmap, and then we can sometimes even point them in direction of people that can help them develop whatever we need to see in order to believe that they're a good fit for our community.
Yeah.
And so Well, and so we found giving them a roadmap to become somebody suitable for our community helps.
So you're helping them regardless anyway.
Exactly.
They're just going to go from here to here. That's the baseline to get into our membership.
Yep.
And maybe we can look at this again.
100%. Yeah.
On that note, we're same sort of field, I guess. And we spoke before about being branded as coaches and mentors, and all that jazz, and another guru.
Yeah.
But people are investing in us, and we touched on Necker Island, how we felt. It felt like one of our members on that island.
Yeah.
What have you invested in? What's the biggest investment you've ever made? I don't know, you might not be able to give me the numbers, but biggest investment you've ever made, and you were terrified as you're about to make it. But then what was the lesson on the back of it?
All right. So if we go to 2016, if we just zoom into that. So I started the Entourage in 2010. By 2015, we had a valuation of $62 million. And we were a freight train. At that point, we went into, by demand, accredited education and became a college. And then we entered that space, and it just captured so much momentum, and there was such an incredible growth path on an international basis. We were a college, but we were becoming a higher education provider. It's called a HEP. And when you become a higher education provider, it's not just so you can deliver diplomas and master's diplomas, you can now deliver degrees and doctorates and stuff. And so we were, spending $30K a month going through that process to become a HEP. And we were exploring Singapore, because in Southeast Asia, Australian qualifications are often held in a higher regard than local qualifications. And so there was a really extremely attractive and relatively frictionless, other than the compliance stuff, that was a lot of friction, but from a market perspective, it was a very strong growth path. And so we tripled down on it. About a year in, the government essentially wiped out the industry in an attempt to push students back to university and TAFE. And so that move sent us into extreme distress. And so this is what we're talking about earlier in terms of, the first thing was they withheld payment from anybody that had entered the space in the last 2 years. And so for us, that was a cash gap of, I can't remember exactly, probably $4 or $5 million that I needed to find and fund elsewhere and through myself. And then they changed the regulations, which essentially wiped out the industry. And so it was a left and then a right hook. So I was $4 or $5 million in debt, losing $500,000 a month, 3 months away from losing about $800,000 a month. And by chance, this guy was brought into our office and introduced to me as, somebody that helps in turnarounds. Because the changes in the registered training organization space, RTOs, was on the front page of every newspaper.
Yeah. So the whole industry was rorted, wasn't it?
Exactly. And so everybody knew.
Yeah.
And so we were doing some work with Grant Thornton on some other stuff, and they brought in this guy called Saeed Jahani. And we're having a meeting about something else. And I said, Jack, we know where you're at with the RTO space, so we brought in Saeed. He's from Turnarounds. He might be able to help you. But I mean, my default position is usually one of skepticism, particularly when dealing with corporates, because I find that people that live in corporate world are so disconnected from consumer and sometimes the grounded realities of small to medium-sized business that I kind of just immediately kind of wrote him off. And then we started chatting. And I determined very quickly that this guy knew exactly what to do with someone in my situation. He knew how to negotiate with the banks. He knew how to negotiate with the ATO. He knew how to negotiate with creditors. He knew how to manage everything, and not just at a high level, macro level. He knew that too, but like down to the what to say, what to do. Like he just had an incredible decades of experience in turning around businesses, but not from a theoretical or corporate standpoint, from a very practical and tactical standpoint. And so I decided we needed to work with Saeed, and that was going to cost us 80 grand.
Whilst hemorrhaging.
Hemorrhaging was an understatement. Yeah. We had hemorrhaged.
Yeah.
We were dead in the water. We were dead in the water. And so, like during this period, there was a weekend where I'd sold a bunch of stuff to float the company. We're probably like 18 months into this kind of distressed period, right? You tell your CFO, don't pay me this fortnight because you like even just that amount of money staying in the business. So there was one weekend where I literally, I was going to buy us all breakfast, and I tried to pay with it, and I didn't have any money. A year earlier, I had a $62 million business, and now I couldn't afford breakfast.
How are you feeling in that exact moment, or when he says that's going to be $80,000? Like what goes through you? Are you ice cool in that moment? Do you feel sick?
Yeah. And so for me, there's probably an immediate kind of twinge in the stomach of like, oh, that hurts. But that for me, that lasts about a minute.
Okay.
Because I just know I've just been around long enough to know that sometimes there's stuff you need to do, and it's not going to taste nice, and the medicine is going to taste awful, but you need to have it, and so it's done.
But you also couldn't be 100% sure that he was going to be the same, right?
No, I was 100% sure in him, but I was probably 20% sure that we were going to be able to navigate through. So I would have given us a 10 to 20% chance of success at the time.
Wow.
But if the business doesn't succeed and you pay someone 80 grand, then it doesn't really matter. Whether you're 5 million in the hole or 5 million and 80 grand in the hole.
Yeah.
It's much of a muchness. And so that was probably the biggest investment relative to my financial position at the time. And I think the key lesson in that for anybody watching or listening to this podcast is, if I can cut a check for 80 grand when I can't afford breakfast, you can invest 3 grand, 5 grand, 10 grand, 50 grand in your own growth and development this year. Because if you want to build a business that does $1 million in profit or $2 million in profit, you can literally buy those skills. I reckon it costs you about 50 grand to acquire the skills to build a business that can produce $1 million profit a year. And if you can build $1 million profit business per year, then over 5 years and 10, that compounds. And so spend the 50 grand. Even if you don't have it, go get it somehow.
Yeah.
And spend the money to get your outcomes faster.
Or spend 10 years doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, you will buy the lessons.
Yeah.
Do you buy the lessons in 1 to 2 years with 50 grand, or do you buy lessons in 10 to 20 years with hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars in mistakes?
Yeah.
It's like the biggest accelerant is spend the fucking money to get in the right rooms with the right people to shortcut your journey. And if you're not willing to do that, I question whether entrepreneurship is right for you.
There's very few, if any, that I could think of right now, truly successful people that haven't done that in some way, shape, or form along the way. And tell me about having Ariella in 2 years ago.
2 years ago, yep.
Yep. Changed your perspective on business at all? Because you had her, and then 6 months later you came back into. Was that right? Was she?
Yes, exactly.
So you did the opposite. You were like, okay,
exactly.
I'm going to go back to work now.
Exactly.
In a way.
Exactly.
Did you were retired?
Exactly.
Did you in position as retired?
Yeah. Pretty much.
So has it changed your thoughts on business? Are you doing anything different to what you did before because of her?
Everything. And so, to my observation, a lot of fathers use fatherhood as an excuse to start playing small. To me, there was zero reason to start playing small. It didn't soften me, it sharpened me. It gave me a new level of drive and purpose and reason that's probably unparalleled, in terms of, to a degree that I'd never necessarily felt before. And for me, that's not even it's not even a financial thing. It's someone asked me the other day, what do you want to be for Ariella? And if I'm being honest, I want to be her hero, in the sense that I want her to be able to look at her father and have a huge amount of respect for how he loves and treats her mother, how he goes about his health and fitness, how he leads in business.
Why is that important to you? Where does that come from?
Because I think she will model not what she is told, she will model what she sees by way of example. And so if I want her to be a balanced and developed and intelligent human being, my best shot at achieving that is to demonstrate it. A lot of people say, oh man, I'd die for my kids. I don't give a fuck whether you would die for your kids. My question is, are you prepared to live for your kids? And are you prepared to make the hard decisions and be consistent and show up for your kids? Because that's the best thing you can do. This whole I'll die for my kid, you're never going to be presented with that. Like it's a fake scenario. Yeah. Whether you will live for your kids or not is a real fucking scenario that is asked of you every day. And so it was a whole new purpose.
And you are only one of two mentors that they see do the majority of their learning years, right?
100%. And Panda is she's just the best mother. Ari will wake up in the morning and Panda will go in and I might be in the lounge. Sometimes I go and wake her up. Sometimes Panda goes and pulls her out. But if Panda does it, I hear the door over there, good morning. She brings this old Panda energy into Ariella's existence.
You can have two of them in a few years.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, it's already showing. And then, the level. So the level of we consciously and intentionally try to foster a energy in the household of love, joy, laughter, example, constructive. We don't complain, we don't whinge, we acknowledge a challenge so that we can get busy solving it. But we're very intentional about who we are and the energy that we set up in the home for the reason that you just mentioned. If your kid is under 12, they think that you bring the sun up every morning. Like that's the level, they don't have any concept of God yet. And so you are the master of the universe. And as you and I know, Tucky, the first 7 years is the imprint period where they haven't yet developed the conscious mind or the conscious faculties to filter things like we do as adults. And so just about everything in their environment seeps in at a unconscious level and it's coding the programming that will be with them for life unless they choose to recode and update their operating system down the track. But man, if we can set them up in a way where they don't have to recode and upgrade their operating system when they get to 35 because we didn't fuck them up, that'd be a good change.
Good brief.
It's a good
brief.
That's the number one job.
I got two more questions, and one of them's on that. I have to ask because I read recently you're going to homeschool. Is this true? Did I make this up? You're not going to send it to conventional schooling?
We're definitely not going to send it to conventional schooling. So Ari was born in 2023. If she followed the traditional path, school and university, she would finish university in 2045. 2045. The education system was designed literally 200 years ago to produce factory workers that were absent of independent or creative thought. And so we have an education system that's not teaching anywhere near what's relevant in 2025, much less 2045. And the rate of change in the real world is going to continue to change at an increased rate, and the rate of change in traditional education is going to continue to not change. And so the divide and the disconnect is only going to become greater. And then the other thing, the first thing people say to me is, but what about socialization? And Ariella is like her mother, one of the most social people I've ever seen in action. And so it's almost like, we'll continue to put her in environments where she socializes with people her own age and people my age and Panda's age and all that kind of stuff. But if I'm to future pace Ariella's life over the next 25 years, if I was to be sending her to a traditional school, to my thinking, the biggest risk factor in her development and her well-being is who she would be socializing with at school.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know these people. And I'm also, so that's just peer group, but I'm also very unconfident in the values that she will be picking up from the school itself. Now, I'm not saying there aren't some brilliant schools out there, because there are. And I also think teachers do an exceptional job by and large. But do I want to be putting my daughter in an environment where she's socializing with anybody and everybody and absorbing the values of a traditional schooling system? Absolutely not. I think that's the number one thing I could be doing to disadvantage her. And so what we do exactly, I will probably create my own school.
That's a mic drop moment right there. We could talk about that all day. And my last question for you though is, I guess we're talking about young kids right now. Young Jack's looking at current Jack. What does he admire about him, and what would he question?
Oof, Tucky. Okay. What would he question? I don't think he'd question anything, man. And by the way, that's not to say that I don't have challenges and that everything's always rosy. Far from it. But we do choose to live very intentionally. And so there's nothing that I'm doing that my younger self would question or disagree with. What I think he would admire, again, I think he would be surprised at the level of, commercial success, probably, because I came from a place where there wasn't a lot of examples of that. And so, I remember when I started out a business, my goals were like here, and today, I've passed a lot of that. So he would be surprised by that, unquestionably. But yeah, the main thing to me is how do you treat and show up for the people you care about most? And so I think he would probably be pleased with that. I don't think he'd be surprised necessarily. I had really good parents, and so yeah.
Well, I want to finish by just saying what I admire in you, mate, and just say that your willingness, not just here today, but your willingness, openness, and even humbleness to share your lessons. And that's not in recent years. That's from when I did Unconventional in maybe 2015, I think it was. And I think I said it before you came on stage in 23. I put the pictures up, and you would never remember that conversation, but you were out in the crowd talking to what I considered back then to be average Ryan, a normal Ryan who was a nobody. Right. And I think there's a lot of people that are in our world, unfortunately, that they get put on a pedestal, some of them rightly, but then they sit there and they stay there and they live there and they disconnect from the crowd. And I really admire that you don't do that, and you've been able to maintain amongst all of the levels of success a level of humility, right? So I appreciate you coming here.
Mate, I really appreciate
sharing everything you did.
Thank you for the invitation. It's always, and I mean this really genuinely. It's always really good to talk to you. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Right, pleasure.
Thanks, man.
Legend.